Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to the Sports Medicine Project. Now, I am without a co-host today. She's left me for dust, but we're making up for it with our very special guest, Connor Gleadhill, who's also in Newcastle as well. Unfortunately, we're still on Zoom, even though we're probably about 4 or 5 kilometers away. But how you going, mate?
Good, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, lovely to have you on. Now, very extensive bio, but I'm going to try and make it down into an elevator pitch and then we'll get cracking into these questions. And obviously today, talking about research, but that is just so broad, like it can mean really anything. And we're going to try and delve a little bit into the weeds and see how we go. So you're a physiotherapist currently completing your PhD with the University of Newcastle, and which is bloody awesome. And I love to say this, you also work clinically at Newcastle Sports Medicine. And we'll get into a little bit of your history because I know you worked previously as a physio as well. And you've also established which we're just talking about off air, a research network called Research in Practice, which is basically, amongst many things, looking into how health professionals can help researchers by asking more relevant questions that, help us all in clinical practice, which seems to be the big thing that we all discuss is like research is not being translated, but it's awesome to see someone bridging that.
Yeah, perfect. That's it's a big driver to do things differently. I think broadly for me, it is a driver to look at things from a different perspective, and that's certainly what my research career has been heading towards, and what the network's all about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah.
and,
Did
and
you?
it's and it's flying along. It is going from strength to strength, so which demonstrates that there's a real need out there for it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the point in your career where, so I imagine you do your undergraduate, you become a physio, you're working in the clinic. Was there a point where you maybe envisioned this happening, or you were just seeing a patient one time and you're like, far out, that study didn't correlate to anything that what I just did? Like, how did it all come and why did you want to go down this route? Was it like an epiphany moment or what happened?
That's a really good question. I think both, a little bit of both, in
Mm.
terms of I had always had, like we do in clinical practice, the frustration with research, by and large, that it's very hard to translate that into clinical practice. It's really hard to do, even if you've got someone who fits the bill exactly to the kind of T of a participant in a randomized controlled trial that you might be looking at. There's just so many other elements that go into clinical practice that uh, aren't described, number one, in a report of a randomized controlled trial, but that are also very different to a randomized controlled trial. So, this person's life in front of you would be very different to the person's life in a randomized controlled trial. Anyway, that aside, the kind of typical frustrations that it was just really hard to translate research into practice. And what does this research that I'm reading, what does it mean to
Mm.
me? How do I improve my practice based off this research? I also, though, I've always had a drive to lead change. And I think I've had a few kind of attempts at doing that through running businesses. And I did genuinely, this is not kind of trying to big note myself, but I did
Yeah.
genuinely I've had a bit of a drive in,
Mm.
the middle part of my career to generate some kind of local change and network and community. And I think that's what
Mm.
ripping is it is a bit of a realization of uh, I like to lead people around me, but it is a very different way of leading. I think it's, really just promoting the voice of people around me to do something about shared frustrations, do
Mm.
something different, and let's try it together. So a bit of both. There has been maybe a bit of preordained
Yeah.
stuff in there to see what has led me where I am currently. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, a very good answer. It's very deep, philosophical. That's good. How, before we get into talking about kind of critical appraisal, how do you find, the frustration, I think, and I'm sure you would have went through this, and one of the things that, as I was saying before, I love that, you're in the clinic and you've been in the clinic and you spend a lot of time with clinicians. There seems to be, and maybe that's just something that's not really there, but somewhat of a divide between, on one side of the camp, you've got the researchers, and on one side of the camp, you've got the clinicians. And the clinicians think that the researchers don't know what they're talking about because they're not in the clinic. And then vice versa with the researchers thinking about the clinicians when they say that this research is really crappy. Whereas we're like, well, we don't really know how all the complexities that go into it. Do you think that that's improving and we're kind of gelling together to try and work towards a common goal?
That's a good question. And I mean, to again give you a personal anecdote to your question, I am currently living that divide, clinical practice and research divide. I think there is a genuine divide, and though there's some nuance here that I think it is changing, and there's probably people might emphasize. So I even know personally, I've probably emphasized the clinical practice research divide in writing research papers. I think it depends, like everything, that there may be more of a research than practice divide in some instances, and in some areas, and with some conditions, and but I do think, like anything in life, they're totally different modes of thinking. And again, this is my personal experience. They're totally different modes of thinking. They're different professions, and they almost need to be separate. So they need to have a divide, and that's okay. I think the whole thing about my work and Rippon is that it's not about making researchers clinicians, and it's not about making clinicians researchers. It's about working together more and the value that adds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Like, you're getting very deep. We're only just started. You're meant to ease into it. That's great. It's really good. I think you're just the topic that you're researching is, and I think it's fit, maybe younger clinicians maybe haven't, it took me a while to discover it as a new graduate. Like, you don't even realize it's a problem until you actually get to it and you're like, I'm reading all this stuff, but it's not correlating to what's happening, which is awesome. So yeah, getting stuck in to you, what does a critical appraisal mean, and what defines what you would call a good quality research paper? And if you can keep the answer under 20 seconds would be great. I'm sure that's like a 2 hour long answer, that question.
That's right. That's 4 podcasts in itself. You give me 20 seconds. What is critical appraisal? I think it's a skill you need to learn to, it, for all intents and purposes, shift the chaff from the wheat. So to do one step of trying to understand what you can throw in the trash and what you need to take a little bit more seriously. All right, was that 20 seconds? How'd we go?
End it there.
Because I think, though, the next step is something you have sent me before, is then understanding and trying to even practically get to the point of applying your research and practice, which is, understanding external validity. And that's not so much critical appraisal, right? That's something different, I think. And then implementing in practice, which is something different again.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think for the clinicians that are listening to this, or the 1,000 of you, I'm hoping you're all clinicians. There'll be surely some people that aren't, but do you think that the biggest barrier for people to develop that skill of, being able to appraise research and, kind of define if it's good or bad quality is someone's ability, or it's time consuming? What do you think kind of is that barrier, and any kind of tips to to address that? Because I know, like, I do a weekly research review for an email list through our podcast, and it takes me a lot of time. And I've been doing it for a while, and I've done some research out of after my undergraduate, and yeah, it's time consuming. So for a young clinician, I can see it being a struggle, or for any clinician, really.
Time is a big barrier. Time is
Yeah.
the ultimate resource, and there's not enough of it. And critical appraisal, I think so this has all started, Blake, I think, from that little snippet of critical appraisal that we sent out through Ripon, that, you know, you can learn these things at uni as well. And largely it is scratching the surface of critical appraisal. Although that sounds like I'm saying that critical appraisal is too hard to do. It's not, and people need to learn it, and it needs to be done. It's just that to do it well, yes, you're right that there is a bit of a time aspect to it. That doesn't mean you can't get quicker. Like any skill, you can't get more efficient. I think one of the other barriers is knowledge, and how to maybe get beyond that step of what we learn at uni and that kind of really first level critical appraisal. Maybe my reflections there are that just being around very good researchers myself, I've really learned to critically appraise things well. Not everyone has that exposure. So trying to reach out and branch out your knowledge as much as possible when it comes to critical appraisal actually is important. Exposure to people who do it well and exposure to more of it, like any
Yeah.
skill. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find, like, being in allied health, that's an important arm of you being a good clinician, being able to do that, because things will be forever changing. Do you, like, have you found as you've been, many years out, as people get older, they tend to engage with that less, or what, have you found anything or heard anything like that?
Wow, this is really great. My understanding of this, my evidence base, had on with this, so
Yeah.
that I don't actually think there's rigorous or a lot of data on the habits of people as their career progresses in terms of critical appraisal. So that's a fantastic research question in and of itself. Nice descriptive one. And I'd love if your listeners, if you have data, send it through. Anecdotally, I mean, the only thing I can really say is that I'd hope it becomes more efficient and becomes a little bit just more of an embedded part of your practice. That you can do these first initial steps of really separating out what you need to read and critically appraise. And then when you get to the critical appraisal part, you really start to, I think that's what you get as you move in further into your career, is that those next steps after critical appraisal, like how to actually apply this in practice. That's what improves mostly as
Yeah.
you get further into your career.
Yeah. What do you like for, and I know this is certainly a cry from clinicians, including myself at times, probably not as much now because I understand a little bit better, but the, like, talking from a researcher's point of view, like, what are some of the barriers to creating high quality research papers? Because, like, and you see that on social media where a really good rigorous study comes out and there's always people bringing it down saying, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And it's not as easy as just doing exactly what you want to do. I know when I did my very first study, even just going through ethics, I'd had no idea it was that long and you had to do this and that, and anything that's changed or different, you've got to resubmit it. Like, it's just a whole nother world if you've never done it before.
Perfect. It's people in glass houses. It is it is so hard to do good research. It's so hard. And there's so many things that you just don't appreciate until you actually get into the nitty gritty and you do it. You know, running a trial takes years to start to begin with. You know, like you'll to get the funding will take years, and that's time and effort in and of itself. Then when you get to actually running the trial, there are so many nuances and things that you have to consider that it'll never be perfect. You know, that the amount of time and effort it takes to chase people up for data, it's you know, it's a huge job. And these are definitely things that I don't think that will ever change, right? It's a very hard job. I think the initial stuff to maybe make trials more real world relevant, right? That is stuff that is changing and can be changed quite easily. And I think it boils down to what we've discussed already. It's people working together. Like, you know, if researchers can step out of their bubble to, you know, really collaborate with clinicians and go, well, what does this question, you know, what does it mean to you? Is it meaningful? Will it change things? How do we actually put this into a trial? Like, is this intervention protocol, like, would you ever do this in clinical practice? What do we need to change to really investigate the active components that we're trying to investigate? And those kinds of things can be done quite easily. But back to your point, yeah, it's really damn hard to do good research. So no research is perfect.
Yeah, that's not as simple as just getting 200 people together and go, great, you have to do this, you have to do that, no ethics, and we'll check back in and not like that. And you kind of touched on it before, talking about kind of the research question, or what you're trying to find is always, you know, the big one. Like, are you finding or seeing that researchers, and I know you've definitely done this, which is bloody awesome, like talking with clinicians to see if this is a relevant question? Like, do you think that if we answered this question, it would help you? Like, is that common for researchers to do that? And in the end, who kind of does decide the research question? Like, how does it all kind of come about?
Oh, great question. And, you know, my caveat here is that I don't think there's the data for me to really make an informed answer about, is it common? I'm just really not sure. All I know is that to do it well in a collaborative sense is actually really quite difficult. And there's no real instructions for us how to do it collaboratively and do it well. From my perspective, again, then to answer that, I think second part of your question is that how do we do it, and whose responsibility is it? I think it's both. It's both, and definitely it can't detract from researchers have a track record of developing research questions. That's part of the job. That's what we do. Clinicians, by and large, don't. So I think researchers, we've done this within the network. We've really tried to meet that gap, meet that information need, that you know, to provide education on how to develop a research question is important, and the types of things that go into a good research question. And though I think ultimately, when it comes down to whose responsibility is it, it can't be left to just the researchers, because that's propagating the same old hierarchical, you know, system that we've started with in you know, evidence-based practice and academia and research in general. It needs to be a shared responsibility, and again, I think that's what we've managed to do at Ripon, which is really cool.
It is. It really is cool. I mean, I sound like I'm really pumping up your tires, but it's awesome because the collaboration of them both, and as you're explaining it, it just sounds like you're walking a tightrope between not wanting to go too far to one way and have that collaboration, which is always tricky whenever you bring two groups together. So it's good. Would you say this is actually one of Kelly's questions? How much research that is created do you consider like junk research, in quotation marks? Certainly. And maybe we could have found a synonym for junk.
Oh no, yeah, the synonym. No, I'll say it. Shit, yeah, garbage. I was laughing with one of my colleagues about this question. Oh, look, it depends on who you ask. And this is going to be I can either answer this question if it could be 99.99999%, but it also could be down to the perspective.
Yeah.
That there's no denying that there is a lot of junk research out there. There is, and that's a problem. And I think it's a problem that's created by the system. People need to produce research to have careers, and they need to publish to have careers, and that's not right. That promotes garbage, junk research. But there is also, kernels of good information in research that may not be useful for many people, but some people may find it useful. So it could be 99.99999%, or it could be something like 70%, But either way, there's a lot of junk out there.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to, and that just brought to mind, and I hope I don't butcher it, speaking completely off the cuff here. Can you explain, and I've seen this a little bit on social media lately, where there are studies where they'll have intervention A versus intervention A plus B. And if A plus B does better, they say that it's because of B. So say if it's like exercise therapy for lower back pain versus exercise therapy plus spinal manipulation. And if that group does better, it's due to the spinal manipulation. I'm sure there is an A. It's like an A plus. Does that make sense? A plus A versus A plus B.
Yeah, this is really good. I would call that it's just a randomized control trial.
Yeah.
For the reason that I think when we consider a typical randomized control trial, we might think of an arm that's called a control arm or let's call it a control arm, hence randomized control trial. That there's a really important thing that people need to understand, that control arm is seriously important to describe that, and to when you're reading the study, that exactly what that control arm entails, because it is still an intervention. So it is still even if it's the most quote unquote inertly designed control arm that you can think of in physiotherapy, or in allied health more generally, that there is still there's a situation of these control participants are exposed to a condition that, and they're typically exposed to some factors that are involved in the trial anyway. So whether it's being told you're in a trial, right? And then they just get left to sit and do nothing at home, like that might be in some instances like a wait and see arm. Even that is in and of itself exposure to certain elements, and they may be active. So being told that you're in a trial may actually be an active component that has an effect. Get really deep into the weeds here. So either way, I would just call an A plus B versus A. It's just a typical trial. It's a randomized control trial. And though maybe the cool thing to then pick up for your listeners is that you need to be really clear, and people need to be really clear. Researchers need to be really clear about what that control arm is.
Yeah.
And we need to get better at describing what it is.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean, because I know one of the the criticisms with that is the further you get into it, it seems to be the more problems you find with, this study is great, that's perfect, and then someone picks it apart. And I certainly don't think, and I hope you agree, that doesn't mean that we just discount the trial completely. Like there's too many problems. Let's throw it away. They didn't have the control arm right. I guess and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do it. The skill is in figuring out what is important to take from that.
Bang on. So it is, again, no research is perfect. I mean, there's no such thing. It's just a nice rigorous way of trying to unpack a question and come to an understandable estimate of an average, typically like an average effect. If you're talking the traditional way we run trials, which is with certain kind of level of statistics, frequent statistics.
Yeah.
So back to the question. What critical appraisal is trying to just get to that point to understand what can I just completely throw out here? Like, what studies can I completely throw out? And then when you get to that point, it is about some other things that are like slightly separate to critical appraisal, which you've listed in your questions around what can I take from this trial that is externally valid to my population? And then what can I apply in practice?
Yeah. And that leads us to that question of like, what does internal and external validity mean, and how can we assess that?
So again, my caveat here is that I'm probably going to start to sound quite nihilistic to your listeners, that we honestly don't know much about either. If I'm being totally transparent, I think that's good for clinicians, is that even the concepts that we consider as, hallmark internally valid constructs within trials, they're actually not, from my understanding, is they're not that evidence-based, but they have sound theory behind them. So these are things like, does bias creep in after or before randomization, right? Or does bias creep in measurement? Like these things, that's pretty sound theory.
Mm.
But I'm not sure the evidence base behind it. So that's an interesting one. That's internal validity. And then external validity is even more so very poorly understood. But again, it's this and very poor kind of evidence base behind it, but probably some sound theories in and amongst it all. External validity is around factors involved in the participants, so their age, their BMI, their gender. Do these apply to participants that you see, and is it externally valid to other scenarios? And we're developing ways to actually really understand that a bit better, and there's trial transportation starting to develop that is around trying to understand, well, external validity. And it's really hard. If you actually take a hardline view at this, Blake, there's not a lot that's externally valid.
Yeah.
So you can look at it that way. You can look at it like, you can be nihilistic and think, right, well, no trials apply to any of my patients. Or you can try to have the benefit of the doubt and take a really pragmatic approach to it, so what parts of this trial can I realistically try to apply in practice based off what I know? And that's hard, but important, and needs to be done, right, for practice to get better and for evidence-based practice to improve. So then going back to internal validity, that revolves around some of the, I think you have some more questions that, kind of come into internal validity, and it is largely around bias. So does bias creep into the study?
Yeah. How, like, with looking at just the critical appraisal kind of job in general, does it change varying on the type of research, like qualitative and quantitative? And I've got to admit, those studies where they do a percentage, they are just so much, it's like, if you do this exercise, it reduces your hamstring strain risk by 82.96%. Like it's so easy to take away, and you see that stuff quoted everywhere. Whereas if it's done a little bit more nuanced presentation, it's probably not maybe as shared around or taken in as much, because it's a lot easier to read when it's just as a quick percentage. Like, how does the critical appraisal change depending on those two scenarios and types of research?
Yeah, this is a really good one, and I like this question. And it probably goes to the point before, that there's a lot about understanding external and internal validity that we don't know a lot about. We don't actually have a lot of evidence for. We think that quantitative methods can be more applied elsewhere and vice versa. Not vice versa. That qualitative, typically, traditionally, so this is maybe the first answering, like going back to first principles, answering your question. Critical appraisal or external, let's go external and internal validity. For external validity for qualitative methods has not really been an aspect of qualitative methods in general. There is a term called representativeness. I think I'm getting that right. I hope I'm getting that right. Representability. Essentially generalizability. So can these findings in the qualitative methods be generalized? There is a hard school way of thinking about qualitative methods that you can't really do that. It's, that generalizing based off the sample and the techniques you employ in your qualitative research, you shouldn't really even try to generalize. But I think regardless, we all read qualitative methods and research, and by and large, it's quite fascinating, interesting. You get insight. I think that's what you get from qualitative methods. You get insight into like the experience of the world and our patients and clinicians. Then we go to how does that relate to quantitative methods, and I think we typically have used quantitative methods as this way of then really generalizing to what we should be doing. And I'm not saying that that's not the case, that like quantitative methods shouldn't, be generalized. I think they should. It's just that I think we've had this traditional approach of like, right, well, you can't, in research I'm talking about, you can't generalize qualitative methods, so don't try. And you can generalize quantitative methods, so let's like focus on that. I think it's a lot more blurred than that. I feel like I haven't answered your question, mate. So I think it boils down to really understanding that there are things about qualitative methods that you possibly can generalize, and though there are things that you can't generalize. And vice versa for quantitative. There are things that you can generalize, and there are things that you can't generalize. And it's getting to the point of understanding what you can and can't.
Yeah, it's just one of the things that, and I was speaking about this with Kelly this morning, one of the things we were looking forward to, and speaking to you obviously in person as well, and other researchers, where people that tend to understand it a little bit more are so much more open to saying, yeah, it could be this and it could be that. We don't really know, but this is probably the best that we can do. And the antithesis to that is other people online saying, yep, this study come out, this is the quote, this relates to everybody, no questions asked. So it's nice to hear that someone at your level is still, explaining that these things, we're trying our best, but we still don't exactly know.
Perfect. You summarize that very well, and you put it much more succinctly than I did. So yeah, exactly.
With I guess the journals that are around in the world, and I'm sure everyone would have heard of like BJSM, for an example, when an article or any kind of information comes out of a pretty reputable journal, can you assume that it's going to be of pretty high quality? Like, I feel as though the BJSM stuff, if that comes out, it's gospel. And I've seen some studies recently come out. There was one on stress fractures and carbon plated shoes, and it was a horrible study, but still published and still promoted. So what can you speak to that when it comes out of a journal that's pretty reputable?
This is quite black and white, that no, high journal does not, high impact, well-known journal does not equal high-quality study. You still have to critically appraise and take it on merit, and do the work to actually understand what the merit is.
Do you what recommendation do you have for clinicians that And I'm picturing it now, and they do it really well. Like the BJSM, they have a podcast, they have their Instagram, they do pretty well at promoting their stuff. For people that see this online or they hear about a research paper on a podcast, what advice would you have for them? Is it to note it down somewhere, go and try and find it, or listen to someone discussing it or talking about it and then interpreting it? Or is it, I guess I'm imagining like a journey you go on as a clinician. Now I'm starting to get deep. You rub it off of me. Like the
Nice.
journey from someone hearing about a study or seeing a statistic quoted from a study, and then the end goal being them getting to the point where they're sitting down to critically appraise it. How do you recommend they kind of do that, or what's one of the ways that you think is best?
Wow, such a good question. I mean, I like it. I think you can't detract from, again, this going back to earlier, time is the ultimate resource, and you can't detract from the fact that if you can have some systems in place to make the practice of putting evidence into practice more efficient, then that's good. So I'm not the kind of, again, nothing's black and white, but I'm not the kind of person that would go, never take someone trusted's opinion on board. You must always go and read every word in the study, you know, and then look at the supplementary material. No, I mean, that if someone trusted within the profession who, you know, it has experience, possibly, is maybe one point, but someone trusted within the profession that over time you have understood from consuming their information that they actually are a good evidence-based practitioner, right? If they have given you a snippet and given you their opinion and summary of an article, then I think that's okay. That's efficient. That's probably a necessary part of evidence-based practice, because then you waste and you miss out on the time to really delve into articles that you're unsure about. That said, going back to the article is always important. Like, delving into it is always important, and coming to a decision for yourself is important. So not always relying, basically just going against what I've just said, but not always relying on, consuming information secondhand or third hand from others. So balance, mate. It's a balance, like everything.
And I'm going to give you a scenario, case study of a young clinician. So any clinician. So I know most of the people, I'm pretty sure it's a pretty even split, but I think the amount of physios that listen to this podcast is just a little bit higher than the amount of podiatrists. But we'll get the pods back. We'll rally the troops between Kelly and I. So scenario is you're a clinician, you've seen something online, you're reading something, you want to get involved in research, or you've got a question, you don't know what to do, where to start, or who to go to. What advice would you have for someone? So they read something or something, they're like, I think I can do better than this, or I can try and I want to help and I want to get involved. What advice do you have for someone like that? Because I imagine, like we've said, time being a big factor for people reading research. I'm sure people just not knowing what to do, they want to get involved. Do you have any advice for them? I know you guys do something through Ripon, I'm pretty sure. Is that?
I mean, this is what Ripon's all about. My short answer is do it. Yeah, do it, and just keep knocking down doors until you're able to do it. And there's nothing quite like, and this is probably some more nuance to that answer, that research engagement is the broad term that I would describe that's useful here. And you can be engaged in research purely as a evidence-based practitioner who just reads research, or you can do research as a clinician. So you can be anywhere on that spectrum, and that's good. That will help move the profession forward, whatever profession you're in. So do it, and just based on your own interest level and your experience, start at a level that you're comfortable with, and then if you want to slowly evolve more into doing research, go and do it. It's not rocket science. It's just takes time, and like we've already said, it does take effort.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'll just drop down your phone number and home address, and they can just go rock up there, ask you what to do.
yeah,
How?
just don't mind the kids and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you like? Is it best for? And we'll obviously put your details and link to some of your stuff on here. Like, is it? Can people reach out to you or to their local university, or what's the best route? And just say, hey, I'm interested. Can you help me?
Well, I've actually had this conversation before with Ben Cormack,
Mm.
and he raised a really good point that I think there's been this tradition of clinicians. You must reach out to your researcher, your local researcher. That's again this hierarchical, ethos that I don't think is very healthy
Mm.
to run with. So again, that's a reason why the network exists, is that
Yeah,
if you're
that's
just
cool.
rubbing shoulders a little bit more often, that makes it easier. So yeah, I would agree. Like, reach out to people who do research, everyone. And maybe I might be speaking for a limited sample of my own, but any researcher would be more than happy to discuss, your questions, your drives and wants and needs to be a bit more engaged. And though I think there is a need for more collaborative approaches, like a network, mechanisms that will at least help people rub shoulders together a bit more.
Mm. Yeah, which is what Rippon's one of the aims, which is awesome, which is really cool. We had one last night, which is awesome.
Yes, I'm glad you enjoyed that. And again, big hats off to uh, all of the Ripon members, especially our leaders within the network, who it wouldn't be what it is without this amazing local community and all of the leaders that have pushed it
Mm.
forward. So team
Yeah,
effort,
it's.
100%.
I was like sitting sitting up the back, and I've got a bit of a cold, so I was sitting up there so I could cough and blow my nose and not draw any attention. But it was just you had this eye-opening moment where all these people that live different lives, see different patients, have all come together for the one sole purpose, like, I want to be better, and this is the network that's going to help me do it. And there would have been 20, 30 people. It was just, yeah, it just shows that there are people out there, like you said, that you can rub shoulders with, that want to do this kind of stuff and be better clinicians and help create better research and things.
It's sounding like an infomercial for Ripon, but I mean, I think though, if I then had to just reflect on any of that, is that it just shows that there is a demand, I think, to have more mechanisms like this, and do go and do it. Try it, and I think it's a worthwhile mechanism to at least try and improve collaborative practice and improve practice in
Yeah,
general. So
that's good. Yeah, it is. I think is that a research thing you have to do? I have to declare a conflict of interest, because I have no conflict of interest with Ripon at all. I just think it's just awesome. And like, I speak with obviously through the podcast, I would at least speak with 30 to 40 clinicians every week in the DMs of our Instagram page.
yeah,
And if I put something up of a story, like, people have reached out to ask that don't live in Newcastle, that just ask what it is, and no one else that I've seen, or maybe I just haven't met them yet, or they haven't mentioned it. No one else has something like that that's consistently in the diary. You guys aren't doing this once every 5 years. It's consistent, and they're on good topics. One on ACL, one on syndesmosis, which was cool, which are the ones I've been to.
yeah, and it doesn't have to be. You can make. I think that's the thing, right? It's a concept. Just it's a group of people that are all willing to get better around a central theme, and it's as simple as that. Like, if you go out there and establish your own, please do. Like, if you're interested in it, please do, because I think, and this is my own bias, I think it's a worthwhile mechanism. But here's the scientist in me, that it's not the only
Mm.
mechanism to improve practice. So there needs to be more. Like,
Yeah.
there are other mechanisms that you can do. It's just that there's something about just a group of people that want to improve practice together that there seems to be the demand for it.
Mm.
Yeah.
What would you say is like the quick fire questions, the really pippy ones that people want to know? What are some common myths surrounding critical appraisal that you've heard and seen?
That it's that it that it takes a lot of time and effort based on, but though this is almost going back to our question earlier, that it takes too much time and effort, so it's not worth doing. I mean, I think that might be a bit of a myth. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's absolutely worth doing. So, and I think there are some things in critical appraisal that don't take time and effort. So that's probably dispelling the myth.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of easy stuff to do.
Yeah. How how do you think clinicians can get better at just applying research into clinical practice? And that's like a 4-hour answer, but an elevator pitch.
Yeah, this is a dozen podcasts. This is a podcast series in itself. I think critical appraisal is one step, right? But then you have these other steps. So that's maybe my broad answer, that it's a multi-stage process, that in and of themselves, their skills. Critical appraisal, there's then understanding external validity, and then there's implementing evidence in practice and implementation of behaviors in practice. It is a behavioral thing, so you have to take into account, and this is some of the work from Ripon, you have to take into account all these environmental factors and contextual factors that go into practice that will make it easier for you to do a certain behavior. And that is, it's like the analogy of designing buildings to help people get out from an emergency easier and quicker. There's a lot of design that goes into that, and that's behavioral, implementation in a nutshell. Design the processes and systems around your practice that makes it easier to do it, and that's a large part of helping the implementation happen. But yeah, there's a lot to discuss there.
We might have to turn this into a podcast series. Do you think that and I say we're very loosely, I'll say, do you think that you're getting better and research as a collective are getting better at it, in the sense of, and I'll use this example because obviously there's 1 billion papers, probably 1 million come out since we started this podcast on back pain and ACLs.
Yeah.
Are we getting better at researching these topics? And I can only think, now I say it out loud, probably not. But how research from what we thought 10 years ago is different to now? Like, is that because we're getting more critical and getting better, or is it we're just doing different things? Bit of a multi-stage question, but I guess, are we getting better at researching what we're trying to find? And do you think we will get to a point at where we can be really confident to translate it pretty generally?
Okay, two points to that question. I reckon two parts. First one, are we getting better at research? 100%. Yeah. Yes. So I go black and white with that question. There is no nuance for me. Research is getting better.
Yeah.
With time, people are understanding how to do research better, and they're then doing better research. That's simple, clear, easy. So I think you can apply this, and I look back to a comment that I received online a while ago, not too in the distant past, that research from previous times in 50s, 60s, there's this habit of discounting that research because it's just old, and we should not discount that research because it may be higher quality, and we just should stick with old research sometimes. I take that point, but there is an undeniable improvement in research quality over time, and it's the scientific process that you evolve your understanding. So it's an important thing for clinicians to remember that you don't have to always, even though there are some well-established older papers of really hallmark quality that they'll never go away. You have to evolve your understanding. and research is getting better. So that's number one. Then the second part to that question is, I think was, are we getting better at applying it in practice? Was that the second part?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No. Is my answer to that, maybe with a bit more nuance than my answer to the first part of that, is that I think we don't understand enough about how difficult it is to put evidence into practice. And that's where we need to move as a research community. Really, the implementation science world is really only emerging, in the last kind of 30 years. And it's an evolving field of science. And it's not been applied that much in the allied health, pain, musculoskeletal world, and it needs to be applied more. And that is one that we do need to see more implementation science in our fields to understand how to put evidence into practice better.
Do you think that I'm going to say the rise, but it's always rising with social media and things like that, like the access to research and researchers has really increased, and people are maybe researchers becoming a little bit more maybe well understood in the importance with and you can go onto Instagram, and I was just, as an example before this, had like 10 minutes for like a lunch, and I was just looking on like Jared Powell, he shares a lot of research. I was reading a study, I put that up on our story. Like there's research everywhere. Do you think that that's increased and that's a good thing, or not a great thing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a good thing to have more trusted voices out there. Although, again, then it's a double-edged sword. It just means there's more information for people to try to dissect and analyze and appraise, and that's hard. It's a double-edged sword, but it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think we actually missed this question. I wanted to know, this is one of Kelly's questions as well, that what is an intention to treat analyses and why is it important?
Yeah, this was a nice one. And trying to think about a simple way to explain this, it's really important that an intention to treat analysis really treats everyone that was initially involved in the trial to the same statistical analysis. Whereas when people don't do that, you may have a small portion or a large portion of people that don't fulfill get to the end of the trial, and they've dropped out, right? So then when you don't analyze, if you do analyze just these people that kind of stick it into the trial, there may be biased reasons why these people stayed in the trial anyway. So, a nice, easy example is they may be just getting better anyway, and they've got a constellation of things about themselves that will make them stick out in a trial and fill in the questionnaires and report things in a really positive light in the questionnaires, and that may all collect together to add to a bias impacting on the effect from the trial. And so it's in essence, intention to treat is trying to remove that bias. And that's what trials are. That's largely what quantitative methods are, is trying to answer questions with the removal of bias, trying to minimize bias. And you can't remove all bias. So
just like in life.
Just like in life.
Yeah, treating patients is like life. I wish I had a nice little analogy to finish up with. That's all I've got.
Treating patients is like life, yeah.
Yeah. What advice do you give to students and clinicians when trying to remain evidence-based, how to keep up with the research and effectively kind of appraising information? If you could give a couple of short, I guess, bits of advice, and basically this whole podcast has answered that question. So if you've got this far, you would have had all your answers there, but I guess short and sweet as takeaways, I guess.
Oh, good one. I didn't prepare for this one. So, off the cuff, I think just the overarching knowledge that these things, skills, and you get better, you change your approach to these things over time. So, understanding that if you're doing it now, just keep doing it, and ultimately you will get better at it. You just keep doing it. Number two is that I think maybe just understanding that critical appraisal, this is busting that myth that it's not too much hard work, and it's not effort. It's not too much effort that you don't have. These are things that will improve your practice, and there are simple steps you can take to do the first steps of critical appraisal that aren't too difficult. So just remembering that you'll get better over time, and it's not too much effort. The last one is, I think if you're thinking that there's a lot of garbage out there, you're right, and that you are the person that can change that. So if you want to change the kind of garbage research, the junk research that you may read, then get involved.
Yeah, I like that. It's very easy to be critical of research without understanding, like you said, the nuances of years of work and years of ethics and recruiting and things like that. And you can get involved. And you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can be involved at all different levels. You don't have to be doing what you're doing. You can be involved and only playing a small role, but still significant role, and to help make a difference collectively.
Bang on. You can exactly. I think that statement that I've just said can sound daunting, right? Get involved in research. It's not daunting. You can be involved in research on lots of different levels, and it is ultimately only going to help everyone get to the same place together.
Yeah, that's great, mate. Thank you so much. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on. You did mention that you think this could be a podcast series, so perhaps that could be the case. Just trying to find some time can always be tricky in the diary, but importantly, if somebody wants to reach out to you, was there a way? Is it Instagram, Twitter, email, mail, to write something in the sky, publish a paper to get your attention? That'd be a good one. How can they best get in contact with you if they've got questions or something to do with Ripon or something along those lines?
Brilliant question, Blake. I'm trying to actually get some balance in my life and not do too much social media anymore. Even though I think in my clinical career, it's hard not to do that, because you sort of need to promote yourself as almost on a business level as a clinician. But trying to not do that, email is best. So maybe just steer people towards email, because it'll take me too long to get back to you if you try any social media platforms. So email me.
And send you an email if people want to know more about Ripon or even get involved in anything, or just ask you a question. I'm sure you'll be able to connect them with someone who can help them.
Yeah, bang on. Yeah. It is about connecting the dots.
Awesome, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Enjoy your afternoon.